fellow Trek Chatters, I'm Pit Trekkie, and welcome to another episode of Pittsburgh's Trek Chat. So, for today's episode, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to transport all of you back to May of 2005. On May 13th, 2005, it was the final episode airing of Star Trek Enterprise, and it was entitled These Are the Voyages. Can you believe it's been 20 years already since that episode? And actually, not just an episode, but one of the most controversial episodes of Star Trek ever made, or at least up to that point. There's been a lot more Star Trek since then, but at that point, These Are the Voyages was quite a debatable issue in fandom. So, what I wanted to do in this episode is I wanted to talk a little bit about the episode, kind of talk about some of the good things, and there were a few good little tidbits in it. Definitely some of the bad things about it, and what they could have done possibly as a better series finale that maybe would have satisfied more of the longer-term fans. So, in order to start this episode, what I got to do is take you back to the very end of the third season of Star Trek Enterprise. The Xindi arc was starting to wrap up. Ratings for the show were tanking, and at this point, UPN was basically on the verge of canceling Enterprise. So, I remember the fear about that. I remember right before the third season finale, there was a story in our one of the local Pittsburgh papers. I think it was Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, but it might have been the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review. But when they finally announced UPN's fall lineup for the fall of 2004, what they said was, and this is the title of the article, UPN gives struggling Enterprise a reprieve. That's a direct quote. But I knew that the show was done for at this point, because it said that they were going to move the show from Wednesdays at 9 o'clock to Fridays at 8 o'clock. Now, longer-term fans of Star Trek know that the third season of the original Star Trek series got approved, but they moved the show to Friday nights at 10 o'clock, which was the death slot, essentially, for all of network television, because people were out on Friday nights. They weren't home watching Star Trek, especially that late at night. So it killed the ratings for the third season, and finally the show was canceled. So they premiered the fourth season of Enterprise on October 8th, 2004, but they cut the budget in half, and so they went from using film to digital camera. And so the count of the episodes was down to 22 episodes for the season. Despite that actually happening, the fourth season of Enterprise was one of the best seasons of Star Trek that had been around for quite a while. Basically what it did is it took the show back to its prequel roots, and instead of just kind of having episodes where they were just out exploring space or whatever, they were finally tying canon events from the original series, and even probably from farther on in the franchise, and seeing the very beginnings of it. So during the fourth season, we saw the beginning of the seeds for the Romulan War that were going to be coming. We saw the Vulcans actually get away from from the high command, and a lot of the emotion that literally kind of filled in those types of Vulcans, and we started to go back to the teachings of Surak from the Awakening. So a little bit of that was going on. We saw the Organians. We got a touch of the eugenics wars with the Augment arc. We got Dr. Sung back, but it was Dr. Eric Sung this time, played by Brent Spiner. So it was another debatable topic in Star Trek fandom, the cranial ridges. We finally got an explanation as to why those weren't around in the original series, which I thought was genius, but a lot of fans didn't care for. But anyway, what ended up happening, besides just having much more improved stories that tied to canon, they also did multi-episode arcs. So you had episodes that were two-parter, three-parter, no more than 3 parts, and a couple standalone episodes in between. And then the big tie-in to basically the original series was the last 2 episodes before These Are the Voyages, Demons and Terra Prime, which basically focused on Colonel Green, and to talk about kind of like selecting humans who needed to survive after World War III. And it tied into the xenophobia that had been established earlier in Season 4 about, after the Xindi crisis, how many humans went isolationist and xenophobic. So that was very cool. Then comes February 3rd of 2005, and I'll never forget it. I was in my local library. I went online to StarTrek.com. Top story: Enterprise canceled. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I knew it was coming, but just to see it actually being said, it still stung. Because that meant, for the first time after 18 years, since 1987 when The Next Generation premiered, there was going to be no Star Trek on TV. And for me, I was 6 years old when The Next Generation premiered. When Enterprise ended, I was 24. So from age 6 to age 24, I had a season of Star Trek, at least one, for all those years. And a lot of other fans have had the same situation. So they ended up saying that the series finale of Enterprise was going to air on Friday, May 13th of 2005. And it was going to be only a 1 hour episode, but it was going to air in a 2 hour block. So the second part of the Demons two-parter, which was Terra Prime, aired first. Then These Are the Voyages aired right afterward. And it was the first series finale since the original series that was only an hour long. It was not a 2 hour special. Now, when Rick Berman and Brandon Braga, who were running Star Trek at the time, described this episode, they described it as a Valentine to long-term fans. And it was a way of saying goodbye to not only Enterprise, but to 18 years of consistent Star Trek over the years. So, what I found out in doing research for this episode is that UPN pretty much strung along getting Season 4 made. For one reason, syndication, which meant money. Okay? Typically, there you need 100 episodes for syndication. At least that's the way the rules were back long ago. They managed to get Enterprise to 98. Now, I'm going to talk about that later on in this video. But that's basically the reason they kept Season 4 going, was they needed a bigger way to be able to sell the show into syndication. So, what was These Are the Voyages about, this Valentine to Star Trek fans? So, it took place 6 years after the last episode, Terra Prime. So, it was framed in an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called The Pegasus, where basically Riker was part of a cover-up that showed that the Federation was developing cloaking technology, which was against the Treaty of Algernon from 2311. But what happened was, it's not just a cloaking device that happened. It was a metaphasic cloaking device, so they could pass through solid matter. All right? But Riker was part of the 9 survivors of the Pegasus who mutinied against the crew because they were trying to keep this from going. But he mutinied because he wanted to defend his captain. He was a young ensign, so they got away. But they were sworn to secrecy from this. Now they finally found out where the Pegasus was, and they were trying to beat the Romulans to the ship. So what they did, the writers, was they framed this episode within the Pegasus, where Riker needed to decide when he was going to go to Captain Picard and feel comfortable confiding in him about the whole history of this mission. So, basically, it's framed in 2161. Enterprise is about to be decommissioned after 10 years. The founding of what seemed to be the United Federation of Planets was happening. Archer was going to give a speech. He gets contacted by Shran, who they thought had died 3 years earlier. He was out of the Andorian Guard by this point. He had faked his own death. Basically, he was trying to protect his wife, Jamel, who was introduced in the 4-season Enterprise episode, the Enar, and their 5-year-old daughter, Tala. So, this criminal syndicate basically thought that Shran stole some sort of item from them called the Tenebian Amethyst, which was some sort of gem. They didn't really go into detail about what it was for, but I'm assuming it was some kind of weapon. But he never actually did steal it. And so he went on the run for a long time to protect his family, but then he was found 6 months earlier. And so he had been on the run, and so they finally recently got Tala. He was able to go through his network to try to find out where she was, and he found her on Rigel 10. He was pulling in a favor with Archer to have their one last mission go to Rigel 10 to rescue the daughter. So they end up rescuing the daughter, but they have a fire battle against these pirates, essentially, and they escape, and they save Tala. One thing that Shran actually said is their ships can go no faster than Warp 2. So they were figuring, okay, we're going to let Shran go on a ship, and then we're going to head back for the signing of the Federation Charter. But what happens is, apparently, it wasn't exactly accurate, because they caught up with Enterprise and beamed aboard, and when Archer and Tucker responded to the intruder alert, they got surrounded. Tucker went very protective of his captain and had him knocked out so that he could lie to them and tell them that he could bring Shran to them. But he overloads some sort of, I guess, EPS conduit or whatever, and in the process, Tucker is mortally wounded and dies. And then by the end of the episode, Archer's not, he feels for him, he's talking a lot about how he has to go and give this speech about how the last 10 years of being in space was worth it, considering everything they just went through and just losing Tucker. But T'Pol encouraged him to go and make this speech. And he had a very nice goodbye with her. And the end of the episode was, as he goes out and makes the speech, Riker and Troy say something about it. Now, during the framing of this episode, Riker tries to go to all the senior officers from Enterprise and kind of see if he can get some feedback on what he can do to feel comfortable talking to Picard about the cloaking device. He finally gets it from Tucker at the end of the episode when Tucker says about how much he trusts Captain Archer with his life and asked Riker if he knows anybody like that, and Riker goes, "I sure do." And so that's how the episode ends. The sad part about this episode is that it was basically a TNG episode with the Enterprise's crew supporting cast. They didn't actually have a goodbye. It wasn't their characters, it was holograms of their characters. And so this episode definitely did not go very well with fans and with critics. Okay? Especially not only because of it robbed the fans of the closure of Enterprise, but also because of the unexpected death of Tucker. They just threw it in there. So there were some critics who made some comments. So What Culture actually said that this was the 19th worst episode of all of Star Trek ever made. CBR said that it was the 4th worst of Star Trek ever made. Not of Enterprise, but of Star Trek, the franchise. Screen Rant said that it was the worst episode of the entire franchise. CNET actually went to Star Trek Las Vegas for the 50th anniversary. I was at that convention, but I don't remember being asked this. But they actually polled fans at STLV 50, and again, the fans said that it was the worst episode of all of Star Trek. Den of Geek actually initially praised the episodes because they added Riker and Troy and TNG elements into it, but they felt that later on they felt that it wasn't what fans deserved, so they later ranked the show as 6 out of a list of 15 worst episodes out of all Star Trek. Okay? So there were some other critics who made some statements as well. So Patrick Lee of Sci-Fi Weekly stated, quote, "The episode reduces the Enterprise cast to the status of lab rats," end quote. While Rob Salem of the Toronto Star said, "The episode robs the characters and their fans of any significant long-term development or satisfying sense of closure." So all the way around, nobody liked this episode. And quite frankly, the cast members didn't really like this either. Jolene Blaylock referred to the episode as appalling, saying again that it was more of a TNG episode versus Enterprise, and they didn't get closure. Connor Trenier said that he actually liked the episode, but he feels that the episode should have had what he felt was a MASH moment. And that's a reference to the series finale of MASH, where they flew away from the 4077 and they had goodbye spelled. So he felt they should have had some sort of moment like that. Maybe they could have, all of them disembarking from Enterprise and leaving Space Dock. That's the way I would have looked at it. All right. Anthony Montgomery felt upset about the episode because he felt their character stories were never wrapped up. Jonathan Frakes, initially he was on board. He thought this was a great episode, but he has recently said in another interview later on that, quote, "In hindsight, the show was dismissive to the Enterprise cast." Essentially, Enterprise's cast, they were guest stars in their own episode. Now, Rick Berman actually defended the episode. He says he understands the reaction of the fans, but he does that self-sabotage that I teach clients in therapy. Yes, but, which means when anything before the but is BS. All right, he said that he feels that it was, quote, nonsense to actually say that the episode was more of a TNG episode than Enterprise. Brandon Braga had some feelings later on as the years went on about how he felt it disenfranchised the fans and the Enterprise crew as well. All right. One little bit of trivia from this episode is when Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis actually came in to start filming their part of this episode, the Save Enterprise campaign was going on. And the Save Enterprise campaign was brought together so that way, obviously, they wanted to get a 5th season going for Enterprise. But what they wanted to do was try to earn money as well so that they could send it to another network and have some sort of funding to start a 5th season, which would have been very nice, very interesting, but unfortunately it never happened. All right. Now, despite how bad the episode really was and how it truly didn't give closure to Enterprise, there were some things in the episode that I actually did kind of like. If you watch the scene where the Federation Charter is being signed, and you see Reed and Sato and Mayweather talking, there are a few actual Star Trek writers or producers for Enterprise in that scene. If you look closely, you can see Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens sitting there presenting or watching. Manny Koto was there, and Andre Bormanis were also there as well. So it was nice to have a little cameo. It was kind of a nice little tie-in to what you leave behind from Deep Space Nine, when a lot of the cast and crew, or behind-the-scenes people like Ronald D. Moore, Ira Stephen Bear, and others were in the Vic Fontaine scene. So I thought that was really nice, and those people really contributed a lot to Enterprise, especially in the final year or so. That was really nice to have that. I also enjoyed some of the upgrades they did to the Enterprise sets. So if you look at they added some monitors around the bridge, and you can see that they have a lot of these like colored blocks in them, and they're very reminiscent of the colored blocks in the when you see the Enterprise, the original Enterprise bridge, and you see the kind of lights just kind of circling around the stations, blinking. That was a nice little nod. At this one by T'Pol station, there's also this like Spyro thing or whatever, which looks very similar to the one Spock had near his scanner, which was really cool. I like the fact that they brought Rigel 10 back into this. I love that it actually bookends everything from the first episode to the last episode. And there's even a line that Captain Archer says when Tucker is trying to tell Archer that he doesn't need to go on this mission, everything's going to be fine, we can handle it without you. He basically says it bookends the two episodes. I can't remember the way he worded it, but it basically beginning and end for him, for their 10-year mission. Alright. Shran marrying Jamel. I mean, he saw a kind of little bit of sparks flying between them in the Enar when they first met, but it was nice to see that they actually had a daughter. And it's also very interesting to see that when an Andorian and an Enar mate and have children, they're green. That was pretty cool. It was also nice seeing the Enterprise D sets again. I think they did a good job with getting the holodeck down pat, the crew quarters that Troy was in. They did a little piece of 10 forward, even though they added that to part of Menage a Troy when they're at the very beginning of the episode when they're having that ceremony. You can actually see Riker playing chess with one of the Ferengi to the left, while Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis are over here for These Are the Voyages. All right, they did a pretty good job bringing back the observation lounge. With the observation lounge, for the most part, while it looked the same, you could tell that things were a little bit different. Like they didn't have the stickers on the doors during the Next Generation, but they had them here and there. I think there were a couple plants or two that didn't really seem to fit there. But overall, they did a pretty good job. Most of it actually really was the same observation lounge set that had been modified for the Enterprise E for the movies, but then they put it back for the Enterprise D. If you also look at one of the turbo lifts, it didn't look exactly like an Enterprise D turbo lift as well. All right. I also enjoyed that Riker actually kind of went through the entire crew trying to figure out how he should go and when he should talk to Captain Picard, or if he should talk to Captain Picard. I love that it was a nice tie to show Archer and Trip's relationship, how strong it was, and how that mirrored really how Picard and Riker saw each other, which we know from all the different episodes and movies, how much they cared about each other. So it made sense that that was kind of the little piece that kind of got Picard to go, or I'm sorry, Riker to go and say, I trust Picard, I need to tell him what's going on. All right. I also noticed, I rewatched the episode a couple hours ago before I started filming here, and I noticed there was kind of a Wrath of Khan moment in the episode. Counselor Troy mentioned in the engineering scene between Tucker and Reed that he didn't know that he wasn't going to be coming back. All right, and so at one point during Rigel 10, Tucker almost falls from a catwalk that comes down, and that could have easily been seen as like a so-called death scene for Tucker. Or, oh, maybe that was after that happens. Maybe he's actually going to survive. Okay, then he ends up dying in the end. He sacrifices himself for his ship and crew. Sounds very similar to when in Star Trek II when they were going to kill off Spock, and it got leaked out by Gene Roddenberry that this was going to happen. So they had a scene with the Kobayashi Maru where it looked like Spock died, and Kirk said to Spock, "Aren't you dead?" So that piece happened. All right, and then he ends up dying in the end to sacrifice his ship and his, or to save his ship and crew. So he sacrificed his life. So there was a parallel there between Spock and Tucker. All right. Now there are definitely some episode dislikes. The first one is just the fact simply that none of the real Star Trek Enterprise characters were in this episode. Yes, the actors were there actually playing their parts, but they're avatars, essentially. And here's the thing that you can think about too, and this has bothered me for the last 20 years. Everything that we're watching in that episode is subjective and a guess on the historians who actually built the holo program. Because they didn't film this while Archer and T'Pol and all them were talking. It was a recreation by the Enterprise D computer based on historical information, and then it adapted to things that Riker would say or Troy would say if they were involved in the story. Like, how did they know in the shuttle pod that Tucker and T'Pol were having a discussion about their relationship? You know, it was basically the computer was compensating, so a lot of that stuff was subjective and really probably didn't happen. You know, so I think that kind of pulls me out of the story a little bit. All right. Why did the creators of this episode, why did they select the Pegasus? I mean, the Pegasus is a great episode, don't get me wrong. But, I mean, there were plenty of Star Trek episodes that they probably could have picked up that were probably even more memorable and more popular that maybe could have framed a story in. I mean, I think they did a great job shoehorning this to These Are the Voyages story into the Pegasus and molding the two together. I'm just kind of curious why they picked that particular episode. And also, the simple fact is, look at Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis in this episode. This is what they looked like during the Pegasus. Okay? This is what they looked like in what's supposed to be the same time frame. All right? But it's also, what, 15 years later? So they've clearly aged. And you can tell Troy doesn't even have the same hairstyle in the episode. So, I mean, it's a tiny little nitpick, but again, it's kind of like, it pulls you out of the story a little bit. Because it's like, wow, you can tell this isn't the same time frame that it was made. In canon, yes. Real life, no. All right. Tucker being killed off. There was absolutely no point to this. He was probably, I would honestly argue, he was probably the fan favorite of all of the characters on Enterprise. Got so much character development. Connor Trinneer was super charming in playing the role. Excuse me, getting dry here. All right. Essentially what they basically did was they did this for an emotional moment or shock value, essentially. All right. And really, it worked. They got what they wanted because 20 years later, people are still discussing this episode and discussing the pointless death of Connor Trinneer. All right. Another thing that's bothered me over the last 20 years. You're telling me after 10 years of serving on Enterprise, they are the veterans of the Xindi crisis and saved all of Earth. Not one of these people ever got promoted. You're telling me that Sato and Mayweather were still ensigns and Reed was still lieutenant? Come on. I mean, it's absolutely absurd and made no sense. You're telling me that Paramount couldn't spend a few extra bucks to buy a few extra pips to put on their uniforms, but yet they added the Starfleet badge and the names up here? Give me a frickin' break, okay? It makes absolutely no sense that these heroes of humanity and all of Starfleet would have not have been promoted. It was just rushed and made no sense, all right? Next thing that bothers me about this episode is this truly the founding of the United Federation of Planets or something right before it? We know it's not the Coalition of Planets. They did that in Terra Prime. But Troy has a line in the last episode that always stuck with me. She says that these people didn't know that what they were doing, what they were witnessing was to give birth to the Federation. Well, they have the Federation logo hanging up there. You're telling me this wasn't the birth of the Federation? I mean, it had to be. It was 2161. No one's ever said there was some little thing before the Federation. The Coalition was years earlier. So, to me, it's definitely the founding of the Federation. It just doesn't make sense that they would have... Troy's line just didn't make sense. Now, could it be that maybe she was saying something like, this was going to give birth to the Federation that we know? Maybe that's what she meant. But it was just very confusing the way that they brought it up in the episode. Now, we're talking about this episode and how it seemed to be the formation of the United Federation of Planets. That takes me back to what I said earlier about this being a Valentine to the fans and 98 episodes of Enterprise. So here's what I think should have happened in this episode. I don't understand why they couldn't have had 2 more episodes, and then a 2-hour series finale. They could have had something that was some sort of unique episode that kind of closed out season 4. Demons in Terra Prime, Manny Koto actually feels that that was basically the ending of the series, the series finale. Okay? But there was no finality to it. They could have had maybe a 1 or 2 one-off episodes or a 2-parter, which would have made 98 episodes that closed out the season and the arcs, maybe pulled something together. I don't know what it could have been. Then they could have had episode 99 and 100 as the 2-hour series finale. They had the Valentine right there in their story, and they blew it. They could have shown a 2-hour series finale that would have showed fans for the first time the founding of the United Federation of Planets. It was right in their laps, right in their brains, and they just skipped over it. It makes no frickin' sense. And it didn't have to include the Next Generation. It just could have been the Enterprise crew going and founding the Federation and then them leaving Enterprise for decommissioning. It could have been a nice pull out, kind of like with the Enterprise D and Deep Space Nine when they ended. A nice slow piece of music playing while the crew's leaving on shuttles or transporting off the ship, pulling away from Enterprise in the series ending. It would have been beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. It would have been a legit part of Star Trek canon. We would have gotten to see the whole thing. Why they didn't think to do that pisses me off to this day. It makes no sense. Okay? So I don't know if any other fans would feel that way, but that's how I felt. All right? So one thing that was interesting about this, not just the episode, I can see what they were trying to do in terms of trying to end 18 years of Star Trek and wanted to do something a little special. I mean, if you see the final montage, that is a beautiful moment. I mean, when I watched it today, I choked up. Not when Picard was passing by with the Enterprise D talking, or Kirk passing in the original Enterprise and saying his part of the speech, but when Enterprise came flying with Archer saying where no man has gone before, and Enterprise flies right by the camera while Archer's theme is playing, I choke up every single time. It never fails. As it was so beautiful, and it was that moment was a beautiful ending to see Enterprise flying by toward that nebula, on its next mission or whatever it was doing. I think that was very special. Now, this episode, all the Star Trek finales from the Next Generation on were on TV Guide covers. Enterprise actually got that. We actually got 4 different Enterprise covers with them in their uniforms, basically from the finale. Now, it wasn't just talking about Enterprise's finale. It was basically talking about the finale of all of Star Trek after 18 years. But I thought it was cool that was a little piece of the Valentine, a little add-on, were those covers. All right. Now, some final thoughts from me about this episode. I do believe that Rick Berman and Brannon Braga wanted to make this episode in good faith. I don't think that they were looking to create some stinker that was going to be up there along with Threshold as one of the worst Star Trek episodes ever made. But unfortunately, it just turned out that way, and I think they missed a good opportunity to make a really good episode that really could have wrapped up Enterprise, but also ended the franchise positively. Again, for a real visual of the formation of the United Federation of Planets, and then everything would have been done. All right. So, does it have a legacy? Is still being discussed? Absolutely. So it's just going to always have a negative legacy attached to it. I did watch it. It was fun to watch, but again, just knowing what was going to happen in it, and it was rushed together. It was the story premise. Actually, Rick Berman and Brannon Braga said they had a year earlier that they were going to make it if in the event that Enterprise was canceled for the 3rd season. It got modified again for the 4th season, and I believe it was Brannon Braga that said that regardless, even if the 4th season of Enterprise would have led to season 5, These Are the Voyages was still going to be the season finale. Okay, whatever. I don't think it would have made sense, but whatever. But so I don't really see this episode per se as a Valentine. I definitely do see it as a good attempt at a goodbye at this point. And a lot of people still say after These Are the Voyages, that's when Star Trek stopped. Because there are a lot of people that with New Trek they're not very happy about. But that to me is beside the point. Star Trek is still continuing. But there was definitely a finality there with that episode. And so These Are the Voyages are definitely going to have a long legacy. There's just no denying it. So that's it for my review of the series finale of Star Trek Enterprise, These Are the Voyages, for its 20th anniversary. I would really love to know what all of you as fans think about this episode. If you think there was some good, some bad, was it all bad? I don't think anybody's ever said it's all good, so I don't expect that. But please, feel free to leave comments down below. I will definitely get back to you. If you want to watch previous episodes of Pittsburgh's Trek Chat, all you have to do is go on to youtube.com, type Pittsburgh's Trek Chat into the search engine. It'll take you directly to my channel. You can follow the show on Facebook, facebook.com/Pittsburgh's Trek Chat. You can also follow the show on X at PGH Trek Chat. Looking forward to the next episode. Until then, may yins live long and prosper.